All right. See, everybody, welcome back to a special episode of the Scarlet and Blue Show. You may be wondering, what is this AI technology where you see different photos and different boxes of us in the future? Not actually us in the future, just some individuals, a little bit older, a little less hair, and our each of our fathers. So Bob, Arlen, welcome on.
Thanks, guys. It's great to be on. I've absolutely enjoyed immensely the shows all summer and fall. So, what an honor to be part of the Scarlet and Blue Show.
Well, I've been waiting to be on this show. It's great to watch. It's a lot of fun to watch. At times, it is. I got to turn the volume down in order to watch. But either way, this is exciting. So thanks, guys, for having us on.
I just want to know why it took so long to get us on.
We feel like a full season of going 11-0 and this witch hunt we have going on has kind of created obstacles for us to bring you on. But the goal is, of course, to always bring you on. And what better week than Rivalry week of the game? Garrison, how are you feeling?
I feel good. Now that we got Connor Stallions, the cheater, out of here, now that we got Chris Partridge, one of your telling all your players to stop, don't talk to the NCAA. It's nice to have a good a good Teton fan like Bob Sack here, my dad here. Good to have you too, Dad. A great Buckeye, a Buckeye of integrity, something that your program lacks, as we all know for the last 2 years.
Gosh. All right.
But
here we go.
So everyone listening, for those of you listening, maybe you've tuned in every single week. Maybe you've picked up episodes here and there. If you've watched us consistently, we pretty regularly will refer to our fathers as instrumental into our fanhoods. Mm-hmm. And I would say, Garrison, I don't want to speak for you, but almost solely this guy on my right or left, depending on how the orientation of the screen is set up, is responsible for me donning the Maize M. I feel like, Garrison, you would say the same for you.
Oh yeah, man. From a young age, my dad instilled Ohio State football to me. And I mean, also my first real year playing. Actually, no, my first year playing football was the national championship year when Ohio State beat Miami, and my dad was my football coach that year. So it's ever since then, man, it's just it's been honestly a pleasure to be a Buckeye and just taking that from him and having him instill that in me.
Bob, can I call you Bob on this? Dad, Scatty. Thoughts? Anything you want to add to that? Just as yeah.
Arlen, you're the visiting team this week. You can go first.
Oh, thanks, Bob. Well, we all bleed scarlet, and one thing that that I love about the Ohio State University is not only the pageantry and the history that goes along with Ohio State football, but also the success that's come along with it. I was at the Ohio State University in what we would call the dark ages, and that was back in the early John Cooper days. John Cooper was actually an incredible recruiter, and really he was a fabulous tactician of the game, except for the last game of the regular season and many of his bowl games. But a fabulous coach otherwise. Brought in some amazing talent into Columbus. Had a difficult time developing it. So, but those were my early memories of Ohio State football. One story that I'll share with you real quick. So I've been a Buckeye fan since I was a kid, and I remember watching. My mom and I were watching. Oh, Bob would know this, being a historian, but I think it was a Gator Bowl with Ohio State and Clemson, and Art Schlichter had dropped back to make a pass, last play of the game, and he threw a pick, and the defender ran out of bounds on the Ohio State sidelines and happened to bump into Woody Hayes, unfortunately. And I remember my mom was a big Buckeye fan as well. We were watching the game together, and she yelled out, "Oh my God, he hit him!" And sure enough, the early days of ESPN, so we went from, just a legendary coach to the dark ages. I mean, Michigan has had their dark ages as well as a reason. Those dark ages and when I was at the Ohio State University. We've come a long way, baby.
Well, yes, if you want to talk about the 1979 Gator Bowl, happy to do so. That linebacker for the Clemson Tigers was none other than Charlie Bauman, who picked off that pass to seal the victory for the Tigers that evening. I really think he should be in the University of Michigan Hall of Fame because what he created on that with that little interception was nothing short of spectacular. But yeah, Arlen, I go back further than you. My memories into this fantastic rivalry date back to November 24th, 1969. The Bucks came to Ann Arbor that day. People thought they were so good they could beat the Minnesota Vikings. That's how good they were. It was Bo Schembechler's first game ever against Ohio State. And on that day, 22 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray. And as the band played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. 24-12 was the score. And it launched the 10-year war between Michigan and Ohio State. I was just a kid. That was the first time I ever watched Michigan football. And that's what really is the beginning of my story as a fan. And that's what, I guess, bred Bryce at some point. Had 10 fun years as a kid. Went to my first game in 73, the first Ohio State-Michigan game. That was the 10-10 tie. Really the first opportunity to flat out despise Ohio State and the rest of the Big Ten for that matter. So here we are 50 years later and nothing's changed. We despise Ohio State. We can't stand the rest of the Big Ten because everybody doesn't like the one at the top of the mountain, and that would be Michigan. So that was through the early 70s, the 10-year war. Bo won it 5-4-1. The one game, of course, was the tie in 1973. 1980s, pretty good. Guy named Jim Harbaugh guaranteed a victory in 86. That was about the time I was at the University of Michigan and had a chance to work in sports information there and spend my Saturday afternoons for 4 years in the press box working for the legendary Bruce Mate. Great time and great experience, even touching and feeling the rivalry more so. 1990s, you are absolutely right, Arlen. What a great decade. 7-2-1 against John Cooper. And the funny thing is, you all hired him back in 87 because he beat Michigan when he was coaching at Arizona State in the 86
Right.
Rose Bowl, Harbaugh's Rose Bowl. You thought you had the greatest coach in the world. And then it turns out he wins just 2 of the next 10 against the Wolverines. So that was a lot of fun. Also in the 80s, I went to my first game in Columbus. We won it that year, beating the Bucks by just a field goal. So great game, but I'll always remember more so the morning of the game. Came down on Friday night, stayed in a hotel, admittedly not exactly a 5-star as a college kid at that time. Came out the next morning only to find that my tires were slashed on my car. So I guess I didn't take the license plates off, and I should have done that. And thus began my actual despising and borderline hatred for Ohio State. So the 90s were wonderful. In those late in the 90s, I met, I think about that time, right around the 2000s, the Gaddy family. And you guys were really the first Ohio State friends that I ever had. I mean, that's how special you guys are. I had no desire to ever meet an Ohio State person, but you guys came along and actually kind of liked you. You were kind of nice. In fact, right about that time, and the first time I took Bryce to an Ohio State-Michigan game. Bryce, you remember it well, 2003, Wolverines won that game, clinched the Big Ten championship in 2003 at Michigan Stadium. First game we've ever stood the entire game, never sat down. Had to probably deal with some fans around that didn't have the nicest of language, but that was the first sense that Bryce Sack had for the feel of what this rivalry is all about. And then it all came full circle. I can't believe this actually happened to me, but in 2006, the game of the century, 42-39, you guys won it. I actually watched that game with Garrison Dean Gaddy. Bryce and I watched it with Garrison. And then again, 10 years later in 2016, I had to sit through a game and watch it with Garrison. We all know how that one ended as well with the measurement. So a lot of great memories in this rivalry. Honestly, I don't hate you all that much. In fact, I find it rather amusing. I find it funny that y'all are so obsessed with the rivalry. We have a couple rivals. The little brother down the road is certainly one of them. But, I find it fascinating that you've got all the greatest high school football in the country in Ohio. you're really the only game in town. There's no other Power 5 school for that matter in Ohio. You really have some pretty soft academic requirements to get into your university. I think there's a number of things that just lead me to kind of chuckle at the fact that you're so obsessed with this rivalry. And I got to tell you, it's just been absolute delight in life. And it's one of the top 5. Maybe I've got 3 kids and some grandchildren now, so I'll call it one of the top 10 facets of life. Just enjoying the 60-51 edge Michigan has in the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry, and 20-13 over the last 35 years, the advantage as well. So it's been a good 35 years.
What's the overall wins losses in the rivalry?
60-51, Arlen. Throw some ties in there too.
Wow.
Wait. Well, I'm sorry, Dad. 1 second here, because Mr. Sack, he glossed over something as he was going through the history of the rivalry. Somehow he talked about the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and glossed over the 2000s and 2010s. And Mr. Sack, you may forget this quote. I just want to read it to you. This was the year after we lost you guys, and a man named Jim Tressel came to town, and he said, "I can assure you that you will be proud of your young people in the classroom, in the community, and most especially in 310 days in Ann Arbor." I don't want to say that word, but you know what state we're talking about here. You can't just gloss over the fact that we do have the most dominant run in the rivalry. And yes, you guys are up 60 wins to 51 wins, but let's not. You can also gloss over the fact that you guys started. I think you guys started 9 years before Ohio State did in football, because you guys started back in 1897. So you can kind of, work in some of those wins there. You also then count for the cheating for the last 2 years. So I mean, hey, no.
Well, what I find interesting about Bob Sack's argument was at first when he says, "I don't hate you guys too much," and that too much. I mean, really? I mean, oh my goodness, it's not that bad. If the edge that the Wolverines have in the rivalry, I mean, those date back, going back 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And I think if the Michigan Wolverine football team was an attorney, I would liken them to a defense attorney, always looking for a loophole, always looking for some little edge so that you can't do it the way you're supposed to do it. You got to find a little out, whether it's, sharing a championship with Nebraska, whether it's arguing as to whether or not our quarterback obtained the first down, whether it's just playing the game without stealing signs in order to win the game. There's all these little loopholes, all these little nuances that happen in Ann Arbor. I don't
bring up grades.
Just don't line up and play the game.
We'll play it. We've played it well the last 2 years, so can't wait till Saturday.
In the annals of history, the last 2 years is. Yep, I'm sure everyone in Ann Arbor is very proud of that.
Well, you guys are focused on recent history. I think again, I've had a chance, like you, Arlen, to enjoy the last few decades of this rivalry, and again, for me, it all started some 50 years ago, and in the last, I think since probably 1969 or so, we've got we've won from 69 to 03. We won 20 out of 35. So those were the formative years for me, and I felt pretty good about that. And I will admit the last 20 years have not been pretty. We've only had three wins in those 20 years, but things go in cycles, and we're looking forward to continuing that on Saturday.
Yeah, college football, I mean, the game, if we take this rivalry and put it on a shelf, college football has just dramatically changed in the last 10 years, in the last 5 years. I mean, the last couple of years, the game has changed a lot. And in order for any real Power 5 team to find success, you got to evolve, and you got to develop, and you got to change the way the game has changed, And I think a lot of the success that you've seen with the Buckeye program in recent history has come about because of the change in the game. And the way they've been able to change the way they go about playing the game. Michigan is they're a little bit behind on that, but they're getting caught up. You're seeing now, college football is all quarterback play. It really is. Every now and then you'll have a lot of. Right now, Michigan has a quarterback who can make things happen, and it's probably, I don't know. I'll give you all a little bit. It's probably the best quarterback that you've had, in recent history. Not just throwing the ball, but also as a dual threat. We haven't seen that dual threat too much lately, but in the last couple of games. But still, I think JJ has shown that he's got a little bit of moxie to him.
I think Saturday is going to be fascinating because there's no doubt that the last 2 years the game's been won in the trenches, and whether Michigan can impose their will again on the Bucks as they have the last 2 years remains to be seen. If they can't, there's no doubt JJ will have to deliver, and I think he's prepared for that.
Yeah, these two quarterbacks, Blake Corum and Trey Henderson. I mean, those guys are almost going to cancel each other out. I think I might be getting ahead, Garrison and Bryce, but
right.
Just bear with me here as we look at the way this matchup is going to happen. Quarterbacks is really going to be I think they're going to be the determining factor.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about JJ, and if he's consistent in throwing, it's going to be a test for Ohio State. He doesn't really have the players on the perimeter that they've had in years past that can get downfield and get separation. But then, on the Ohio State side, our quarterback is, he's like a Dodge Caravan. He's not very exciting. He probably doesn't, he doesn't go more than maybe 65 miles an hour, but he's consistent.
He's a Honda Accord.
Say again?
He's a Honda Accord.
A Honda Accord.
A Honda Accord.
Don't you dare, Dad, entertain that.
Do you like that?
Yeah, I mean that was quick. JJ, he'll have to play consistent. His line is going to have to give him some time, and that's from what I've seen in Ann Arbor, that's going to be the weak spot. That's going to be a difference maker. Ohio State's defensive front going up against Michigan's offensive line. That is the game within the game that I'm really looking forward to seeing.
Bob, Dad, way to bring the heat. We did not talk about that. I might add some music behind that. Very elegant, beautiful, cinematic. That was picture perfect. Garrison regularly forgets about the John Cooper era conveniently, so that's kind of nice.
I didn't watch it. I didn't watch it. I can care less for it. It means nothing to me. Nothing.
Well, Garrison, you could start talking about Rich Rod anytime you want.
Oh, trust me. I have a whole spill on him. A whole spill.
Yeah, you guys got lucky.
And real quick, Bryce, I want to bring this up because, like I said, I've watched football games with you and your dad before. I've watched games not even Ohio State games with you guys. People, I'm telling you this now. One of the scariest things you will ever see in your life is Bob Sack during a high stress Michigan Teton game. It is I've seen my dad upset. I've seen myself upset. That's scary. Bob Sack is scary during Michigan games.
I'm feeling a little jealous, hearing that you've watched games with Bob Sack. And Bob has specifically said to me, I like to watch games alone.
He does.
Because, yeah. So Bob, have we ever watched that game together? Ever?
Yeah, we did, Arlen. One time you invited me over to your house. I think it was 2010, I believe, or 2009. Yeah, conveniently during the Rich Rod era when you knew you were going to beat us by 30. That's when you invited me over to your house.
Hey, the game's decided on the field,
All right, so you guys, excellent job. Already answered a few of the different questions that we meant to ask. We had a few fan questions. One of them was from Wyatt. I don't know his full tag here, but Wyatt, you are asked a lot about the other opposing fan bases, kind of the things you dislike about the other fan bases and dealing with friends, colleagues, peers who are on the other side of the rivalry. And so I think you guys nailed that. If there's anything else to add, obviously feel free. You also already talked about the memories that you have. Dad, you highlighted your kind of one of maybe your favorite memories, being the 73 game, or maybe there's another one too. But Mr. Gaddy, what was your all-time memory from the game? What was the game that you remember the most fondly? What year?
Yeah, so games I remember most fondly, they're going to be a little more recent. That 2002 national championship game was just a great game against the Hurricanes when everyone encountered the South. Miami had all the stars, we had all the blue collar players, and we took it to the Hurricanes. When we talk about the rivalry game, that 1 versus 2, there's nothing like it. That was just it was the game was everything that it was built up to be, and I think everyone was walked away realizing that both teams left it on the field. Only one team can win. The better team won that day, and it was just a memorable game. I don't have a whole lot of fond memories of my time in Columbus watching Ohio State football. Oh my goodness.
Bro, yeah, Bruce, that game in 06, that 06 game, that was a dandy. You remember too, that was the day after the late great Bo Schembechler passed away. So the game took on a whole aura. And here's another interesting stat about that game in 2006. That was the only time these teams have ever played at 3:30 p.m. There's a 3:30 kickoff. Every game has always been at noon. So that's another thing I remember about that strange game. It actually ended in the dark in the snake pit. But it is a rivalry that typically has been played at high noon, or back in the old days, 1 o'clock. But there's been some great games. I remember back in '87, the '87 game. That was where Cooper or Earl Bruce was about to get fired. So remember, Earl Bruce replaced Woody Hayes after the Charlie Bauman incident. And Earl Bruce had a pretty good run at Ohio State too. In fact, he was a really good coach, but he struggled with Michigan as well. And he coughed up the job in '87. And I'll never forget being at that game and seeing the Buckeye players come out of the tunnel for the opening kickoff and all take their helmets off. And they all had white headbands on that said Earl. And at that moment, we knew we were in trouble, because there was a certain level of that Buckeye team being galvanized. And, that's something certainly that could play into consideration this weekend too. It is a game where you just never know, guys, what's going on in the locker rooms and what's going on in the mentality of those players. And I hate to put too much emphasis on that, because I really do think it is a game of X's and O's. And Garrison, you've always been very astute in your football analysis over the years of talking about matchups. I can't wait to see which coaching staff identifies and exploits the most opportunistic matchups on Saturday afternoon. So there is that psychological amount. Most fans tend to go that route. They talk about home field advantage, or they talk about some sort of psychological aspect. And I do think that plays a role. And I think it could be Saturday with just what Michigan has gone through. Could be with Ohio State because they've lost 2 in a row. But at the same time, at the end of the day, the coaches who can devise a scheme that exploits the matchups wherever there's favor for their own team, and then have the players actually execute those matchup opportunities, that's probably who's going to win the game.
And then, Bob, the second part of that is at halftime, when you go into the locker room and now the chess match begins of the football game, when you've seen what the other team is doing in the first 2 quarters of the game, and now you go in and you make your adjustments. It'll be interesting to see in this game in particular how well Sherrod Moore is able to kind of go in and make those adjustments with his coaching staff without Jim Harbaugh being in the locker room with them. You still got your coordinators. Those guys are still going to put the X's and O's together. But I'm interested to see what happens specifically in the third quarter after halftime.
I'll say before that, though, Arlen, I think when you look at the Penn State-Michigan game 2 weeks ago, you saw what happened in the second quarter with the adjustment package, or that heavy package. That was a really a result of Jim saying back in August, we've got 8 guys who can start on our O-line. So you got to figure those guys the coaches are sitting around the conference tables back in July and August, and they're saying, if we have all these great linemen, how do we get them in the game at one time? So they create this package, and sure enough, against the nation's top run defense in Happy Valley 2 weeks ago, they pull out that mammoth package. Somewhere back in June and July and August, the same sort of devising is occurring with regard to the Buckeyes, and it's probably happening in Columbus with regard to Michigan as well. These coaches they're prepared with something that neither team has seen. The key will be what scenario offers the opportunity to use that surprise tactic and surprise scheme, and which players carry it out the best. I think that's just going to be a fascinating part about Saturday afternoon.
Over the last couple of games, both of these teams have been, the coaches have been trying to figure out, what do we show and what do we keep in our hip pocket? What do we show to kind of tighten up on to get the W, but also we don't want to show too much ahead of the big rivalry game. This is a Scarlet and Blue show. It's not the Navy and White show, but I'll talk about Penn State for just a minute. That was fool's gold. That number one defense, that was fool's gold, because they hadn't really played anybody. And then when they got into the meat of their schedule, we saw what Penn State was really about. No offense, marginal defense. Because they're in the Big Ten and the teams that they've played, okay, we'll give them a little bit there. But if they were in any other major conference, they'd be middle of the pack. Well, they're middle of the pack here.
I wouldn't call that marginal defense. You guys had a hard time scoring against them back in October.
It was because of our offensive play. It wasn't because of their stout defense.
I disagree.
Mr. Sack,
you got to give credit to the opposing team a little bit here.
Mr. Sack, I'm going to give you a really fun stat about that game against Penn State, okay? Before that last drive, the score was 20-6. Before that last drive, Penn State had 6 total yards, 0 for 15 on third down. After that drive, they score a touchdown with 20 seconds left. They get their first third down conversion, and they get some extra yards. So, I mean, that score was we only scored 20 points, but that game was lopsided.
You just completely disregarded what he said about Penn State's defense containing their offense.
It's a really good defense. It contained your offense. Even with that mammoth package in the fourth quarter, in the second half, you had 6 drives. I'm gonna take away the last drive because that was the end of the game. It went field goal, punt, touchdown. That touchdown came after James Franklin made a stupid call, went for it on his own territory. So, I mean,
we ran the ball 32 times and didn't throw it once.
Because Bryce, in the first half, every time you guys step back, your Barnhart was getting cooked from the get-go, and your quarterback was getting hurt, and that's why he came up limping. He was limping last week, and he's still limping.
Ball better than that.
That's where it's going to be fascinating to see adjustments, because I agree, Carson's not been too good, but he had a pretty good game against the Buckeyes last year and against JT last year. There will be backup plans to deal with these matchup deficiencies. And again, I think Michigan will be prepared for that. I'm curious to see what Ohio State comes out with scheme-wise on defense that Michigan doesn't expect. And that's where, Arlen, you talk about the coaches reacting and responding. It's those surprise schemes and tactics that will test the mettle of the coaching staff to adjust on the fly.
Hey, Bryce, so we have 5 minutes left here. So we have 5 minutes. I have a fun question for you, for your dad. Do you have a fun question for mine?
I do.
Go first, and we have 5 minutes, guys.
All right. Make it quick. Michigan, your son is a very smart man, loves the game of ball. I criticize him not knowing a lot about football. He does know ball. You get to hear a lot of his takes. What's a Buckeye take that you've heard from him that you disagree with?
That J.T. Barrett was a terrible quarterback.
That's a great answer.
I don't know. I mean, Garrison. I mean, look at his rush yards. Look at
yards.
Look at the guy's record as a starting quarterback in Columbus.
All right, so Mr. Sack, the reason I say this is because I liken JT Barrett to my dad and our Cowboys fans. And by the way, my dad finally got off the Dak Prescott wagon this year.
We can't talk about Dak.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna be quick. He's just like him. He's a trust fund kid. You came into a program with a lot of talent and you got the benefit off of all of it. So, Mr. My question for you. Congratulations on your 1000th win. Pointless stat, but congratulations. How do you feel knowing that not only is your program the first ever coach suspended twice in a season, but after all these wins get vacated, you're also going to be the first school to go to 1,000 wins twice?
That would be a reason for celebration, I guess. This whole thing's been wild. Go back to the summer, guys. We had Pat Fitzgerald in Evanston. We had Mel Tucker in East Lansing. You go back another year, Kirk Ferentz with some issues in Iowa City. The aspects of these Big Ten coaches going through challenges this year have been absolutely amazing. And I cannot believe how this one has been just ballooned and mushroomed by the media. So I think this is so far blown out of proportion, both in terms of two things. One, its position in life, and number two, its actual impact on these games. I cannot imagine that it has that much of an impact on these games. And I tell you another thing too, I've always said from day one, I'm concerned as a Michigan alum, I'm concerned if two things are prevalent. One, did Jim know about it? And two, did the university pay for it? If those two answers are both no, which right now there's been no proof and nothing to say that the answer to those two questions are yes, I'm going to wait this thing out and stick by these guys until I hear otherwise, because right now it's all alleged. Now, having said all that, I will agree there ought to be some penalty, and I think he has served it well, and I can't wait for him to be back on the sidelines at Lucas Oil Stadium in a week and a half.
There it is.
Actually, Michigan, if I can correct you real quick, son, Michigan has 999 wins. They were credited with the win over Oberlin College when they actually did not win that game, because the game was supposed to have ended, I think, at like 4:40 in order for Oberlin to catch the train back to the college.
Wow.
And Oberlin actually had the lead at the predetermined time the game was going to end. But then as the Oberlin team was walking off of the field, Michigan decided they were going to run one last play, in which they just sauntered down the field and scored and walked away, I believe, with a 13-6 final score. But time had officially run out of that game. So Wolverines actually have 999 wins. They'll be trying to get their 1,000th win this coming Saturday in the rivalry.
Wait, if it was 13-6, wouldn't they have been up 7-6?
Oh, yeah, I could be mistaken about the margin of victory, but I am not mistaken about the victory.
All right.
Hey, Bryce, we got a minute. Any closing remarks? We got a minute.
Bob Barlin, score predictions. Go. Dad, you go first.
James Turner knocks through a field goal in the final minute and 8 seconds. Michigan wins at 20-17.
Scatty.
Victory formation, Ohio State 24-17. Trey Henderson runs for 209 yards.
Love it. Love it.
Right.
All right. Well, this was fun. We'll do this again. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you and love you guys.
Yep.
Love
Thanks,
you too.
guys.
Keep up the great work. Good to see you,
Thank
Arlen.
you.
Take care, Bob.